Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to some Warpforge updates. We're going to be going over the patch that is coming up today. And I'm really excited to do this video, and I am going to try and make this a little bit different from the sort of update on Warpforge videos that I've been doing. And also, I just really want to shout out all of the content creators for Warpforge who are putting out some really great stuff. And I am going to single out a couple people, which is Bjthebrave and the Ecclesiarch. And that's mainly because I had watched their videos on the patch notes, and I've just been really enjoying their podcast as well, called the Forgecast. So if you have not followed that, please go do that, and I'll make sure I have their information in the description. And I just really admire, especially with Ecclesiarch, he is super experienced with Horus Heresy. I think has just been doing that for a very long time, and has been doing Warpforge, and just has a very clear head, I think, about these things. And Bjthebrave, I would say the same about. And I just really, in particular, love how articulate they both were, and Ecclesiarch really making it clear, like, you may want to take a look at this EG and like really think about what you're doing. And that's sort of toward the end of the patch notes, because most of the changes, and we'll go over them. Sorry for the long setup here, but just to frame this video, I want to give a bit of my kind of attitude towards balance and meta, so that it's not like, okay, I'm reading the patch notes, it's the same thing you're hearing from other creators, but just kind of like why I approach videos like this the way that I do, in my experience. But to finish my previous thought, I really like that they were very clear, like, this is going to be a problem. This may result in you losing players. Think about it. So I just kind of want to set this up of, like, I think we've had some creators who are, in a way, just very, thinking very critically about the game, and not as like a negative, but as a way of like, hey, if you want this game to flourish and survive and improve, you might want to take, a second look at your proposed changes for the future. The rank ladder is ending today. Sure, I'm going to get on there and try and see if I can hit 2K. I really have not been playing a ton, to be honest, but I have enjoyed playing it when I picked it up. And so we're going to move into a new meta, and we'll get to that part of like which faction is going to potentially be the new boogeyman, if these changes go through. But I realized from both of their videos that I'm just very complacent, or like much more complacent than I thought I was. And I've just gotten so used to, like, oh yeah, this warlord's going to be the best one in the meta now. Oh, this strategy is just going to be, completely broken and it's going to take over. But I guess at least it's a different faction, or it's a different, for Spellslingers, different planeswalker, or different, deck build. And I have realized that, like, that's not maybe a good attitude to just be like okay with, and that it is good for us to ask for more. Doesn't mean that they're going to deliver, right? And I don't want to be naive about that, but it just really, it shook me a little bit of like, wow, I've really gotten so used to, like, this is just what you have to deal with and subscribe to play a game. And of course, meta, I have a love-hate relationship, as I'm sure probably any competitive card game player has. I've been playing Magic since I was 13, and it's been a while. There were metas of every different type. There still are. There are metas where you're like, I got to play this whole deck, this one archetype for a whole year, 2 years, 3 years, if I want to compete at the highest level. And I think you just kind of get used to that and don't really think as critically as some of these other really great creators have, of like, hey, we don't want this. We want something better. We want you guys to listen. And, please really consider that. And I hope that the Warpforge team, who honestly I feel like so far, at least from my experience, has been, I wouldn't say like communicating directly with players, but it seems like they've taken in some of the suggestions from other people. I really hope that they heed these warnings, whether that's through my video or some other great creators out there. So that's enough of me rambling. Thanks for sticking with it, and I'll kind of give a little bit more background into just how I'm sort of feeling about these changes. So, surprise, surprise, Gaskell, needed to be changed. Orks have really been kind of put on the map in this last month. I think everyone's kind of sick of it, which I get, and it was clearly an overcorrection. I had someone comment in the video, like very fairly, like, "Hey, this is not a good Gaskell change." Back before I had really played too much on the rank ladder, and I was really just drafting. And I was like, yeah, no, it's an overcorrection. It's a problem. Orcs have their niche like any faction does, but when it like takes over the ladder, right, that's just not a fun experience, right? So they clearly state, right, they're looking at that. And this sentence, I really just hope, is kind of where they land, right? The balance update also aims to increase the viability of some of the least successful warlords and playability of some of the least used cards. This is the kind of thing, or the balance attitude, that I definitely have a preference and a bias towards, right? So you have things that come in through card design or however it's laid out that are just inherently stronger than others. That happens, right? You just, even with the level of playtesting that, let's say, Magic the Gathering has, they miss stuff all the time because it's a complicated game that spans multiple sets, different keyword interactions, all the stuff. You cannot predict that, you're going to put one deck on the map all the time. Now, hopefully you learn from, your mistakes overall when you're doing this sort of game design. But I think the way to address it is not necessarily to always like nerf things, but it's really to say, okay, we've got a limited card pool, we've got a limited warlord pool. Great. This is a perfect starting point for us to take a look at who is no one playing, who is clearly in each faction the worst warlord, and how do we get them to more of an equilibrium, more, sort of equality within the warlords of that faction or the cards within that faction. Because as much as there are always going to be bad cards, I don't think there is a competitive card game player out there who likes that there is a huge spectrum of a power level, right? I think the closer you get to more of a flatter power level, the more there is skill expression. Because with these, smaller synergies or smaller interactions, if you call the meta right, or if you call, certain lines of play right during a game, then you are the one who should get rewarded. That gets disrupted if cards are strictly just better than others, right? And it creates this kind of like, snake eating its tail sort of thing, where it's like, all right, well, I have to play the best cards, which then beat these cards, and I'm sort of pigeonholed to doing this one thing. So that's my other rant here, which is really to say I support this, and I really hope that this is the balance attitude moving forward, because I think when you bring things up to a power level, it doesn't make the people feel bad for playing Gaskell. It just makes the people playing, Zagstruck actually be like, oh, this is more viable now, right? So just as an example. So I'm just going to say kind of TLDR here. I think the Ultramarines changes here are like pretty reasonable. I am a little bit cautious of like, if Calgar, I had made a video on Calgar Cars Control, which is like too much alliteration. And I don't think it was that great at the time, but the Spear of Macragge change is like pretty noticeable. Obviously, it's only one card, right, within Taro Chronos. But I always felt like Space Marines going tall, aside from Orc and Chaos late game with getting their late game troop cards that cost 10. I felt like Calgar with vehicles had some of the best late game potential. So it's interesting because there's like a pretty clear buff. So this is a great change, right? And I'll go line by line and just give my quick thoughts just to try and keep things short. Euro Ventress, definitely the weakest warlord for Ultramarines, no secret. So now he's going to start with an extra card. I appreciated what Bjthebrave said. We don't know if that extra card is going to be included in your initial hand, right? Or if it's going to be added post mulligan. I think it probably would be maybe a little bit too much of a buff if it's like you get all 5 cards up front. or 4 cards if you're on the play, right? So I think that either way, though, this is just a good way of trying to compensate. Like, okay, maybe there's a little bit more of an incentive to play an aggressive Ultramarines deck, which I still would be pretty suspect of. So yeah, I like that they're looking at him. Infiltrator, I think I echo the same thoughts as everyone else. This is not going to change this card being out of the meta. The fact that a unit has to be damaged in order to blind it is a pretty big drawback. Although it was a little too strong before, so like maybe we got to find a way of just like really toning this down if we wanted to come back into the meta, or like, you know, blind a ranged, blind a a flying unit versus blinding a ground unit. That can maybe be a way of like putting it back into the meta, because 1 to 2 health is negligible. That just doesn't do anything. Inceptor going from 3 to 4 health, I do like, you know, it is that exact kind of replica now of the Toon Blade. I think it's the 2/3/3 for Necrons. So I like that they're giving a little bit more of an identity back, that like, okay, the Space Marines are a little bit tankier. And I do think that that's like a nice little bit of a quality of life buff. Now, Cronus, this is definitely the biggest change. So Cronus and Spear. So Cronus gets an extra ranged attack. It also has 5 health, and I think it's got 3 or 4 melee. So it's just a good 4-drop, like in terms of the numbers. But now, instead of having to have a vehicle in your hand and giving it flank and armor, it's flank, armor, and vanguard, I think. So it's reduced cost to 1, right, instead of 2, which is definitely a big change, and changed its description to draw a vehicle and give it armor too. This is definitely a buff. This is definitely incentivizing actually putting more vehicles in your deck. I think at the very least, you know, probably Calgar. I'm gonna try, you know, running 2 repulsors, which you know, are the 10 drops, 2 of the Dreadnought, and then probably at least 2 of the bike, and or like 1 of the bike and 2 of the rhinos, which is the impulsor here that got a bit of a health buff, which I think is fair. So yeah, we'll see. I think you know, whether it's Calgar or Varro going tall, you know, for late game vehicles, I think you know, the Antaro, Spear of McCracken, Primaris, Impulsor changes are going to lean towards that. Greatest Deeds, I would say again, is just not. This is not going to do it, because as Ecclesiarch said really clearly, the way the game is just set up and designed is like, if something doesn't have a rally ability or doesn't affect the board the turn it comes in, you have to have an extremely good reason for running it. And that I would say is like a guiding light in this game, is like, if it has rally, it's probably worth playing. If it affects the board when it comes in, it's probably worth playing. And if it doesn't, you should really think about if you want it in your deck. Hero's Respite, I think this is a Uriel Ventress buff. He obviously has the worst card advantage out of both Warlords, and so this you can sneak in for paying 2 to draw 2. So I think Hero's Respite, although it probably won't see play in the other Warlords, is probably will see more play with Uriel Ventress. So yeah, I like this. Ultramarines were definitely, really, I don't know what's the word, just sort of like tamped down over the last patches, and I like that they're not trying to do too drastic changes to kind of get them back to their former glory. But they're adding health rather than ranged and attack. So, to sort of benefit like the vehicle strategy and stuff like that. So I like those changes. Goth Orks, I'll just say right off the bat, these are good changes, right? I think this was directly from the creators, so I appreciate that EG listened, right? It's just going to be give 1 melee and range to your troops, of course, and if you don't control one, make 1 Grot, which is obviously a lot less overpowered because you can clear it a lot easier. And then I love this quality of life change that there can't be a Makari infinite, essentially infinite combo. It also rewards you, like Makari, instantly when your opponent plays it against you, you're like, wow, I am just going to take 1 damage on either side, either me attacking it this turn or them attacking me back next turn. And it just sort of, it creates this sort of like feel bad scenario where like there is no way to remove Makari properly. For the most part, I usually opt to like I'm going to attack every other troop but it. But if it's the only thing on the board like worth value, or it's easy to get off the board because I have enough units, then I will do it, because then I will make them pay that one on their turn. So now that it has returned to your hand and cost 2 more this turn, right? There might be a little bit more, dynamic gameplay where you're like, well, I'm going to let them attack me, because if it goes back to their hand on their turn, then they have to pay 2 more for it, right? So I think it puts a little bit more on the orc player to do the right sort of line, and I think that adds a little bit of nuance to Makari, and I do appreciate that, and it obviously stops the infinite combo. All right, Black Legion, which I think they've been coming up. I think they're still, Ecclesiarch had talked about, I think he had like a 70+% win rate on Abaddon, which I'm not surprised by, because I think he had the earliest like quality of life buff with his ephemeral card. So I think they've been kind of on the rise, and I think that they also have a really good matchup into, or at least like one of the stronger ones into Gazkul and like decks that go wide, because you have a lot of options to keep the board clear. So especially like with Chaos Spawns and the one that deals 2 damage to everything. And there's obviously also Helldrake Strikes, so plenty of tools to do with that. So just they feel like a decent meta choice right now. Venom Crawler getting armor 1 is like, I mean, I think the card's already pretty decent, so certainly obviously a buff, and maybe going to make them a little bit scarier. Diabolic Strength, I don't think this is doing it. Again, the quality of life change that needs to happen with Sylar. I get that Chaos is supposed to be chaotic and therefore maybe more random, but it's still, you're not fixing the issue of that. You just don't really have control over your lines of play when you play Sylar, because yes, maybe in certain games you'll get it's too volatile, I think is the clearest way to say it. Some games maybe you get that perfect string of his abilities and it's really good, and they've been buffed, and like they're netting you an advantage. And then other games you're sitting there and you're like, well, I can't play this unit, and I just got, give a mark of chaos, the last 3 turns, and so my warlord essentially has done nothing. So if they want to keep Sylar in kind of a, the prison that he's been in since the beginning of the game, then I guess keep things random. But I think if you are okay with Chaos really mirroring what Space Marines are capable of, like Varro, then just kind of unlock him, set him free, let him choose. And I think that would be kind of a nice quality of life change for the Black Legion. So, and then of course, again, another buff that really aligns with their balance philosophy, which I'm hoping continues, is to change Harkin to be a bit more viable. So now he's losing flying, he's keeping the blast 2, which was a nice meta choice into the Goth clan. And when he deals damage, give a dark pact to a random friendly troop. So obviously the random piece, again, is still going to make it more volatile. However, the fact that you can maybe play more of an aggressive play style and you just jam a bunch of cheap, and they don't even necessarily need to be cheap, because you're not paying a cost for putting a dark pact on a troop. I think it is going to make Harkin more viable, and I wouldn't be surprised when this drops, and I think this is a good change, that we will see more Harkin just in general. So I think we're going in the right direction with Uriel and Harkin here, so I am happy to see that. All right. So if you stuck with me throughout this video, you know kind of what's coming. So the Hive Fleet Leviathan. I'm going to kind of borrow one from the creators here and go for the okay changes. Hormagaunt, which is the second one, increased melee from 2 to 3. Totally reasonable, makes the troop a little bit more viable, and more than any other faction, Tyranids are incredibly reliant on the resiliency of their troops. So I think that changes like this Although this isn't health, right? Just making them more potent. That is exactly their identity. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Leviathan Tendrils already was like relatively decent because they do need some card advantage. Change to draw 2 cards, give 1 health to enemy troop. I generally like this card design, right? So there's the 3 energy card in Chaos that is if you draw 2 troops out of the 2 cards you draw, you get 2 marks of. Sorry, I'm saying mark of Chaos. What are they called now? Well, I'm blanking on that, but you know what I mean. I like this. I think that it's kind of nice that you can have this sort of through line, right? Where like every faction kind of has a version of these things, at least at the start of a game, because it just allows players to be able to really easily make card evaluations and be like, oh, this card in Tyranid is actually very similar to the one in Chaos. And that one in Chaos was pretty good. Let me try this one, and this is going to buff my guys, and that kind of makes sense. I think that from a game design or like balance standpoint just allows, especially for new players, and my emphasis, I think a lot of my content tends to be around new players, and the sort of explanation that I do, this makes things less of a barrier to entry, and I love that sort of change. So let's get to the 2 very problematic ones and sort of the overarching problem that I hope that the balance team is able to navigate, within EG. So Spirit Leech, which Neurothrope, if you haven't seen that, it has this ability to deal 1 damage to a unit, or to heal for 1 on a unit. So that does include your Warlord, but obviously there's Synapse all throughout Tyranid, so that you get even more and more value. And it was actually one of my favorite Warlords to play during the beta or the alpha. So what are they doing? Deal 1 damage and to an enemy, or give +2 health to a friend. +2 health is just a lot. +1 health is still good, right? But +2 health is probably going to run amok a little bit, especially as people just learn how to build and play Tyranids really, really well. Shout out to Bjthebrave, had this excellent video with I believe a Japanese player who has just been crushing it, has been rank 1 or is still rank 1 with Swarmlord. Shimatsu, I believe is their name, on the ladder. And I just think, like, once people kind of figure this out, right, it is just going to be really strong. Sorry, it's snowing outside. Wow. It's cold enough in New York that we're actually seeing snow. So yeah, this is just going to be a big problem, because and this is where we get into, like, we want a better future for Warpforge, which is that it should not be that every balance patch that comes, which I think right now has been once a month-ish, it should not be that just like, oh, new faction is on top of the ladder, right? It's more than, and metas are like that, right? And balance changes do kind of result in that happening. It's just, we want to get things closer to the middle. We want the top end warlords and the bottom end warlords to come closer. Not necessarily for the bottom warlords to jump leaps and bounds ahead of the best warlords, because it just sort of creates the same, just like homogenization, where it's like, okay, well, now it's a Tyranid meta. Now it's a Goth Clan meta. Now it's a Space Marine meta, right? It's like, we already don't have as much content, right? Obviously, as HHL, obviously this game is a lot newer. So, like, anything that affects the diversity of what you can play at a high level is going to hurt the game, right? The more diversity, the better. The more people can just pick up something that they enjoy playing and do fairly well with it, the better. So that also, comes from the Gene Stealer change, right? Instead of camouflage, stealth. Camouflage, as I kind of said in my keyword video, is a bit less effective than stealth. In some scenarios, it is better. And then they lowered the health from 4 to 3. But the problem with Gene Stealer, right, even though they're technically lowering the health, you give it stealth, it can't be targeted. Yes, random abilities can still hit it, right? But you're just getting spotted that Gene Stealer at the beginning of your turn to then put into your existing Gene Stealer. So yeah, it's going from 4 to 3 health, but then it essentially is guaranteed to have 6 health the following turn, right? And then you can give it stealth again if you've got that stratagem, right? And they just keep stacking and stacking Gene Stealer. And if you don't have some randomized stun or randomized removal, it's going to absolutely kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, um, I just want to really rally around what some really great creators have already said, and agree that what we don't want to keep doing in these balance patches is uplifting a warlord from like the mud to this is S tier. In some ways that's exciting. In some ways you're gonna empower the player base that loves that warlord, but it just is not healthy for the long term for this game, because it just doesn't show to the player base that they can reliably, spend time and effort on a warlord that could just get completely, sort of outsized, right, by another warlord, right? It's like, oh, you know what? Let me invest in, you know, uh, this Space Marine guy. Okay, well now they're toned down. Oh, all right, Tyranids are going to be great next patch. Okay, now I gotta go build a Tyranid deck, right? Or I'm going to be super far behind. You just don't want to create pressure to do things that players wouldn't do on their own, right? And so I think that I just really appreciate what has already been said about balance, and I really hope that the EG Balance team is able to really take some of this input to heart. And I think, like, look, I think the general attitude, right, of like uplifting things that are not doing well, it is a good thing. I would rather things get buffed than things get nerfed. I think generally that plays well, but I hazard to say that if it goes too far, it is very unhealthy for the game, and for the players investing their time in your game. So I feel like that's probably too much. I've already said so much. So thank you if you stuck with me. I've definitely been wanting to put out more content, and at times it can be really hard, but I felt like this video, I was going to be kind of motivated to come in and sit down and have more of like a really honest talk about like where things are at, with balancing, what the attitude is, and how things have been going, and just really how we can improve. That I should not just sit here and kind of be complacent with the way things are. That we can try and envision a more ideal game state, so that the longevity of the game is there, and that people join it and love it, and it grows. Because I think that's what we all want, and I'm sure that's certainly what EG wants. So yeah, thank you for taking the time to check out the video. If you haven't subscribed before, I really appreciate it. We're really close to 500. I'm going to try and do some streams when I can in the future, put out videos when I can. It is tough working as well, but I always appreciate all the support. So if anything else, I will catch you guys in the next Warpforge video. Thanks.